Welcome to the roller coaster of midlife. I'm your host, Lucy Q. Now, today we're diving deep into the courage and commitment that it takes to make a significant life changes when the odds seem stacked against you. After 25 years in the corporate tech world, Cindy Gross faced burnout and multiple challenges. From the trauma of reporting workplace harassment to battling pay inequality, Cindy has confronted systematic challenges that plague many industries. But she didn't just overcome these hurdles, she transformed them into stepping stones, redefining her path. Cindy's journey teaches us that it's never too late to pivot. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I love sharing my story with other people because it's so hard to hear women talking about these problems in certain ways. I have people that say I've never gotten to tell somebody something after they hear me speak because they realize they can say things that they had never said before. So I'm excited to be here.
And, surprisingly, not surprisingly, yeah, some of these challenges that you faced, I faced them too. So there's a lot more common ground that women face in this big old work world that we're still trying to find our footing in. So could you maybe start with sharing more about your story?
Yeah, there's a certain point in my life where I realized that everything leading up to there had been a slowly eroding path. So I had come out of high school thinking that I was going to get a computer related degree, and I had several stumbles along the way, but I made it into the tech industry, and I was very happy for a long time. And I at first started out on a all women team, which is kind of rare in the tech world, and that kind of set the tone for things. And then I switched jobs, and all of a sudden everything went wrong, and I blamed myself. And I kept trying to fix all these parts of my personality that everybody was saying were wrong, when really it was just that when I was surrounded by a set of standards that were somebody else's standards, standards that were based on the white men of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that of course I wasn't fitting in. I was different in many ways. My trauma from childhood had made me react differently and made people treat me because they thought I was reacting strangely. But I kept blaming myself. So after about 25 years in the tech industry, there was one incident that happened, which was that I reported harassment. Now, it was far from the first time I had been harassed, but it was pretty egregious. And so I went the next day and I told one of my managers about it, not my direct manager, someone else. And he investigated, that's the word he used, and came back and talked me out of reporting to HR. And I still think that he understood the political situation, and he was right that reporting to HR would have caused problems. What we didn't really explore was that everyone on my team knew, all the way up to the GM, because I was not silent about it. I didn't go to HR, but I talked about it. And so all the consequences that would have happened if I had reported to HR happened anyway, which is that all of a sudden my stellar performance became bad performance, that I was too abrasive, too aggressive, too everything. I was not enough. I wasn't technical enough. I wasn't nice enough. Now, I was the only woman on a team of about 50 men, and you're telling me I wasn't the nice one? I told some of my coworkers that I was getting feedback, and they're like, "You're by far the most diplomatic. You're the one we call in to solve disputes between people, or when we need to smooth something over. How can anybody be calling you abrasive?" Well, that's a side effect of reporting harassment. It changes how people look at us, right? And I don't think anybody was doing it on purpose. That's the situation. And so that started a downhill slide for me. It took me a while. I finally reported to HR after I moved to a different team. Uh, I went through a relationship that had a sudden breakup that I was not prepared for. I started seeing I wasn't going to be successful on my new team, and things just got to the point where I couldn't function. And I decided to go on short term leave. And my therapist wrote up a statement to try to get insurance to cover short term disability that said my cognitive function was severely impaired. And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I go to work, I get in my car, I drive to work, I do stuff." I didn't understand. But as soon as I took that day off, my first day of not working, I fell apart. There was no structure to hold me together. There were no expectations of other people to hold me together. And I spent my leave extended to 6 months before Microsoft said we can't extend it anymore, and I was let go, or I decided to go. I could have come back. I decided to leave instead, um, and that started my journey to figuring out what I wanted to do in the second half of my life. So I turned 55 a couple weeks ago, and it's a very different way of being. So I've learned adaptive leadership. I've learned how to be a coach. I've learned how to sit and be still, which is something that you definitely don't learn to do in the corporate world. And I'd say that was probably the hardest out of all those things to do. And now I I help other women. I'm the person that I wanted, the person I needed to other women that are still in the tech industry so that they can get through these sorts of situations where they're being told they're wrong, they're being told they're not enough, and they're too much at the same time, and how to navigate that world where they can stay in the job they love or pivot to something new where it's truly their choice and it's something they're running to and not something they're running from.
There are a lot of parallels in our story, Cindy. I too faced a sexual harassment situation that ended up in a massive black eye at a conference. And people's reaction, I remember it was my manager, one of her people came to me and said, "Do you want me to help you buy some makeup to cover that up?"
Wow.
And that to me just spoke as, we need to hide this problem.
Yep.
And I persisted like you. I actually immediately went to HR and I persisted this. And a long story short, I ended up, because of my actions, the entire department was let go.
Wow.
So yeah, we've come a long way as women in the workplace, but as you mentioned this earlier, we're allowed in the space of men. We've come as far as they've let us into their space. They expect us to be like them. They're not seeing that, hey, hang on a second. What women have to offer is different from us, but it also enhances overall that we're doing.
Yeah. And there's so much about this monoculture, this idea that you must do it this way. You must let the only emotion you show be anger. You must be hyper logical about everything that you do. You must be very decisive and never change your mind about anything. I mean, these are so deeply embedded in a lot of the cultures I was in. Not every single team, not every single manager, but it was the general culture. And at some point, there'd be a reorg or a manager would change, and you'd be right back in that culture. And I'm not saying that that is necessarily a natural gender divide, but it is the way we divide up the roles of gender in American culture. And so there's a lot about that that just didn't feel right to me because that wasn't naturally me. And also because I'd always fought against gender stereotypes from a very young age. Baffled my mom. She's like, "Where'd you get these ideas?" I don't know where I got those ideas. I certainly didn't get them from my parents. But somewhere along the way, I learned to see injustice even before other people saw it. I think about all these comedians right now that are being brought up on charges for sexual harassment, assault, rape. And I stopped seeing comedians in my early 20s. I'm like, I am not going to go to another comedy act because, they're making fun of women, they're making jokes about rape, and everybody, including the people I was dating, my best friends, they were all like, you're making too much out of this. You have no sense of humor. And it's like the rest of the culture has caught up to where I'm at now, and they're now seeing that that's not funny.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, there's definite things, you can see humor in almost everything, but not everything.
Yeah.
That's for sure. That's for sure. So how is it, you talked about your pivot in your second chapter. How is it that you started to really identify what your next steps were going to be? Once you decided, I don't want to be in this corporate world anymore, what steps did you take to start to bring you closer to what you did want?
So I was learning about adaptive leadership at the time, and there was a lot of leadership of self involved, which is a lot of reflection, introspection. What are your values? What's your purpose in life? One of the steps we had to do to graduate from the Leadership Eastside program was to state our purpose in life, not our purpose as somebody in the capitalistic business world. And that was all new to me. And I remember pretty early on in the class, we had everybody was speaking to the whole class. We had opportunities to share in small groups, and it's the first time I ever felt comfortable doing that. And I remember sharing something about, yeah, when I was at Microsoft, we used to set our videos to 1.5, 2 times speed because we had to learn something that we had to present on the next day or go talk to a customer about the next day. And the looks of horror from almost everybody in the room, like, how can you learn doing that? And I'm like, that's just normal. What, you don't do that? And so that whole process of being around a group of about 40 other people who thought differently than I did, and realizing that I didn't have to follow all these expectations that I had sucked up and absorbed in the work environment. And I also realized that some of those weren't necessarily the true cultural expectations. They were my trauma response combined with the cultural expectations. And my trauma response had been to be very rigid about my boundaries, my guidelines, my rules. And so I'd absorb a rule and think that's the rule, everybody follows that rule. And then the culture was also, they started bringing in fail fast, ship when you're 50% done, all of these kinds of things, which worked great for the white men because they were allowed to fail. It didn't work so well for people who got lots of questions and criticism when we failed. And so I started absorbing that world of looking at myself differently and realizing that rigidity wasn't serving me, that it had served me for a long time in a world that made no sense to me, because I had to make rules in my head. Other people would show up at school and something would happen and they would just naturally adjust. I would have to analyze it and go, I don't know what to do here. Like, my brain did not fit in. It didn't understand how to say thank you and please. And it, all of these things that other people found to be pretty natural. And so I had to let go of that protection. I had to let go of those early coping skills I had. And then once I decided to leave Microsoft, once I decided that their offers of what I could come back to were not sufficient, I started going to a co-working space, and a large number of the people in there were coaches, and they started helping me. And I went, this is kind of cool. I like what they're doing. And I kept saying, I'm an introvert. I can't be a coach. And they're like, I'm an introvert too. What are you talking about? Introverts make great coaches. And I was like, nah, that's not for me. I'm not a people person, because I had all these rules. And most of those rules were, yeah, sure, they're rules. They served me at one point in time. They didn't serve me anymore. And eventually I really listened, really thought about it, explored a whole lot about what coaching is, and decided that's what I want to do, and went to coaching school. So.
And that in itself, that process is what revealed your purpose to you.
Yeah, it was that breaking down of my prior set of rules and finding a way to do that felt safe, because safety is still a primary concern for me. I will freeze up at any surprise. I have friends, I have to warn them, like, don't ever throw me a surprise birthday party, for example. I will not enjoy it because the surprise throws me off and it makes me scared. It makes me resentful. It makes, it brings out the worst in me. And so I had to let go of some of those things and let go of other people's expectations or my reaction to my prior world, and realize I'm in the world today, and the world today is different. I'm different. I'm stronger. I'm able to have flexibility in my life in ways that I couldn't when I was younger.
But it's not, I can see how those rules are imposed on us. And those rules are imposed on us right from the minute we walk into school.
Yeah.
We're being conditioned
Yes.
to fit a mold that meets the workplace needs.
Yes.
And we begin to adopt these perceptions of ourselves. And you're right, being told, I was always difficult because I was a woman in a predominantly male workforce where, I could do the exact same thing as a guy. He was powerful, I was bitchy.
Yes. Yes.
And so you start to think, well, the problem is me.
Yeah.
And yeah, the problem is me because it's how I'm reacting to the situation. But there are still a lot of things that we take on in our world that you begin to believe your own lies.
Yeah. It's gaslighting ourselves. So at work, my therapist at one point described my relationship with work as being with an abuser. And I went, "Oh, I never
Yeah.
thought of it that way." But it was because work, the people at work, the culture at work, the systems and processes that were in place were gaslighting me. They were trying to make me believe in a reality that I couldn't see. My reality did not match their reality. And they were trying to tell me my reality was wrong instead of just different. My reality was different,
Well,
not wrong.
have you ever watched the reality show called Survivor?
No, I've never seen that.
Oh, that's just what I relate the corporate workplace to. Is
Mm,
everybody has their own perception of what's going on. Somebody does something wrong, everyone's got their own perception of it. The person that did it is like, well, what did I do? And then they become the villain and everyone gangs up on them and then they get them off, and it's like I don't care what corporation is out there. I'm going to say at least 90% of them are toxic.
yeah. And I think there's a lot that has to do with scale. So in my tech career, a lot of the problems I was dealing with were performance problems. So it was fast in the test system, it's slow when we put it in production, and out in the real world, what's going on. That was a lot of what I would work on in some form or fashion for most of my career. And it was almost always about scale because people weren't thinking about something that works with 10 users isn't going to work with 50 users, and certainly isn't going to work with 50,000 users. And I think there's a lot of that in culture. So companies start small. They start with 5 people or 500 people. And then when they grow to 50,000 or 100,000 people, the processes don't necessarily grow with them. And the people that are used to the old processes don't want to change because they were successful in the old environment. That's why they're still
This is
there.
why we always do it.
Right. We're
We've
going to
always
do
done it
that.
that way.
We've always done it that way. So a lot of that is about scale. So I try to approach it the same way of find the one biggest bottleneck and eliminate that, and then find the next biggest bottleneck. But we also have to do things that are within our scope of control. So when you think about unfairness at work, a lot of that is gendered, it's racialized, it has to do with various abilities that are assumed to be something everybody has, certain personality types. So there's all of this that needs to be rethought and addressed. And so a lot of times when I'm talking to women, I will have to reassure them over and over again, it's not your fault. Like, the system sucks. The system is in the way. And at the same time, here are the steps we can take to navigate through the culture as it is. And one of those steps might be to find a different culture, move to a different place. But we all know, like you said, 90% of
It's
them
going to
are
still be
going to be
there.
still
Yeah.
going to be there. But you can learn to navigate. You can learn to present yourself in a way that walks the line between their expectations and what you need to get done. And a lot of times that has to do with refocusing our energy on what we want and not on the one person that we know is in our way. So I had spent a lot of time, I wasn't having to work a lot with the person who had harassed me. And by the time I reported, I was on a different team, and he was found guilty, but he was just fine. Nothing serious happened to him. And by the way, it wasn't just me. It was me and a male coworker, and that male coworker and HR kept referring to my coworker as a witness. And I kept saying he was harassed too, but everybody just defaulted to the woman was harassed, the man was a witness. It was like, no, the things that were said to us were about us, not about just me. So there's this whole culture of things that are gendered in ways that most people can't see. And so we can get past those systemic problems in some ways, but that system is still there in our way. So there's only so much we can do as individuals, but I help people do the best they can in this unfair system and help them try to figure out ways within their scope of control to create a more fair system, a more just system, especially if they can move up to where they have a bigger scope of control, either through a formal title, some sort of promotion, or through expanding their scope of influence and cross-team collaboration, where they become the person that multiple teams come to, even without a title bump. They can start changing the culture of all those teams in ways that make the person I'm coaching happier at work, but also starts to slowly change the system little bit by little bit.
Did you have any other tips that women can implement to help navigate when they find themselves in these situations?
I start with getting really clear on what values are showing up on a daily basis. It's really easy. Most people, you ask, what are your values? And they'll list, the same 3 or 4 things that sound really pretty to other people. And there's truth in that. That is true. And when we show up in a tough situation, some other value may come out. Sometimes it's one of the same ones that you say that's pretty. But sometimes it's some other one. And I remember the shock when I discovered that financial security was coming out in all of my interactions. And it became clear that the reason I was staying in a toxic work environment was because I was worried that if I quit, that there would be, I don't know, some unnamed financial disaster, even though I knew from vast experience from watching other people that people who hopped between jobs, who went from Microsoft to Google to Amazon and back to Microsoft, would just jump levels and accumulate vast salary enhancements. But I somehow was too scared of that potential month or two without a salary to make that jump. And so, again, it's not my fault that the system is built that way, yet the decisions I made were based on that value I didn't realize I was executing to. So helping them find that. And then once you know those values, we can start exploring, okay, every time you deal with this one person, this bully, this harasser, or just somebody that you don't like for some reason, or maybe somebody you really like, but they make decisions you don't agree with, let's look at what value is being violated for you. And once you figure out what value is being violated, quite often it's integrity, it's achievement, it's something in the realm of, I want to do these things, I want to operate completely ethically and with integrity. I feel like this person isn't. I want to get things done, this person wants to talk all the time. Or I want to have a good vision and that person just wants to get things done. That value is being violated. Now we can figure out what your boundaries are. And we can talk about the internal boundaries for ourselves. So for whatever reason, American culture tends to frame boundaries as telling other people what to do, controlling other people. I need that person to stop doing this. I need that person to start doing that. That's not a boundary, that's control. So we start working on, what do I need? What is it that I want to, how am I going to recognize when that value is being violated or when my boundary is being violated? Like, where does it sit in my body? What's going on in my head? Now that I've noticed it, the first step of the boundary is, what am I going to do internally? So if you notice that your integrity value is being violated, the first thing to do is say, okay, whenever my integrity value is being violated, maybe I yell, maybe I leave the room, maybe I do whatever. So instead of moving straight to that action step, pause. Now, that's the first step of your boundary. The next step is, what are you going to do instead? And then we work through that because it's different for everyone. And quite often it involves, okay, first let's recognize it, then go journal. Every time it happens, by the end of the day, you've written it down. Now let's talk it through. And usually at some point, as they're talking and I'm reflecting and we're reframing things from, I can't do this, to I want this, all of a sudden the boundary will just come out of their mouth. They're like, well, I need this. I'm like, that's it. You've just named your boundary. And they're like, what? Like that's your boundary. And again, it's different for everyone. And then we start talking about what you're doing internally first, and then what you're expecting of other people, how you're going to communicate to them that this is your boundary. So if you have a time boundary that's being violated, first we figure out what's really going on behind time. Is it that people aren't respecting your choices? Is it that people aren't respecting your wisdom in saying, I need this, I really need a whole week to do this. I can't do it in a day, for example. They're ignoring your advice and your accumulated wisdom and your need to achieve things, for example. Then you can say, when a new project comes in, I'm going to ask that it be put in a queue and it go through a formal estimation process, for example. And then you work that out. And that's one of your boundaries, the way your boundary is expressed. And then you decide how negotiable it is, how strict it is. You figure out what you do when that violates somebody else's boundary. So these are all just things that we're not taught to do, and we have to learn how to do if we want to be authentic and be ourselves at work.
Well, communicating our needs is never something that's taught to us. I mean, you would think it would be something taught to us in school, but it's not, because we're taught to comply.
Yes.
So when you get to the
Absolutely.
workplace, you have all of these adults that have childlike mannerisms in communicating their needs, or even childlike views of what their needs are, because we've never taken the time to step back and actually analyze what our values are and what's important to us. So it's no wonder we get ourselves into some of the challenges that we have.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's letting go of the things that served us once and finding what serves us now that is really at the heart of coaching. It's a different thing in therapy, but it's similar,
I
where
was going to say that letting go of what no longer serves us is a thread that when you get to a certain point in your life, you realize, typically your midlife years, is when you realize there's a whole lot of crap I got to let go of. And
yeah,
once you let go of it, you can then look back at the person that you were and you can see the difference. And the person that you are today is just, it's your authentic self. It's who you were meant to be. It's who you were meant to be when you came into this world. So now,
yeah.
as we wrap up today, Cindy, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with our listeners?
I would say do the introspection, do the work to figure out what you want, and then don't think about finding yourself, thinking about making and remaking yourself. So as you're figuring out what you want, don't blame your old self. Your old self was doing the best you could with the knowledge you had, with the people around you. There is nothing wrong with the person you used to be. And you can let go of that and choose who you want to be going forward. Don't be tied into feeling bad because you didn't figure out this great insider revolution earlier, because nobody that is 15 or 20 or 25 has these things figured out. So don't feel bad that you weren't some special, unique person in the universe who figured it out earlier. Move forward into where you want to be and remake yourself into the person that you want to be for the rest of your life, or until you decide to remake yourself again.
Well said. Well said. Now, to connect with Cindy, please check out the show notes. I will have all of the links in there. And my goal for the roller coaster of midlife is to empower women like you to thrive in this amazing chapter of our lives. So go on and embrace the adventure and start rocking midlife like the badass that you know that you are. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend, because our greatest power is in our community. Don't forget to visit my website, therollercoasterpodcast.com, and click on Start Here to get your free audio course, 3 steps to go from hot mess to badass and start rocking midlife. I'd like to thank you, my listeners, for joining us. And Cindy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me.
And until next time, keep riding the roller coaster and embracing the midlife adventure.